Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's addressing a roundtable on hate speech at the UN headquarters. Prime Minister Imran Khan said religion has nothing to do with terrorism, and he called for effective measures to counter hate speech and Islamophobia. More in this report.
The roundtable discussion was co-hosted by Pakistan and Turkey on the sidelines of the 74th UN General Assembly. And Khan said that religion has nothing to do with terrorism.
No religion has anything to do with terrorism. Almost all terrorism is connected to politics. It's political perceived injustices that produces desperate people.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Muslims are the most vulnerable community to hate speech. He said Muslims are being lynched for eating beef in India. Erdogan also spoke about the Kashmir issue and said India has turned the valley into an open prison.
In India, Ghulam Nabi Azad, India's leader of the opposition in the upper house of parliament, says the situation in occupied Kashmir is terrible. Azad says his recent tour of Kashmir was severely curbed by the Indian army. This report has more.
Since illegally annexing occupied Kashmir on August 5th, India's government has turned the valley into a fortress. Even opposition leaders of the world's so-called largest democracy have not been allowed to visit. Senior Congress party politician Ghulam Nabi Azad had to petition the Supreme Court to gain access to his own homeland. Speaking in Jammu after a 6-day tour, Azad said occupied Kashmir is under a crushing lockdown. Despite the Supreme Court's ruling, occupation authorities prevented him from visiting most of the valley.
I was not even allowed by the administration to visit 10% of the places where I had planned to go in the valley during my stay there. There is no sign of freedom of speech in Jammu and Kashmir.
Congress leader Azad criticized the arrests of Kashmiri politicians and New Delhi's ban on political activities in the valley. Congress leader Azad said he will soon submit a report on the situation in occupied Kashmir to the Indian Supreme Court. The New Delhi imposed curfew and communications blackout in the occupied Kashmir is now in its 52nd consecutive day.
And staying with Kashmir, a fact-finding report has exposed the Indian military's atrocities and brutalities inside occupied Kashmir. The report was presented by activists from the Communist Party of India, the Muslim Women's Forum and the National Federation of Indian Women. The 5-member group visited the valley from September 17th to September 21st and presented eyewitness accounts of the lockdown. The report said 13,000 boys have been abducted by Indian troops and families have no information about them. It said the revocation of Article 370 has united the Kashmiri people and they're ready to fight against Indian annexation. The activists have demanded the restoration of Article 370, the release of all those detained and the removal of Indian army troops from civilian areas. Now, Iran says it's willing to give reassurances that it won't seek nuclear arms and will accept changes to the 2015 nuclear accord. Speaking on state television, government spokesman Ali Rabai said this can only happen if the United States returns to the deal and removes sanctions on Iran. He said President Hassan Rouhani has proposed small changes to the 2015 accord. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry said a detention order on the British tanker Stena Impero has been lifted. But the company which owns the tanker says it's not aware of any formal charge against the crew or the company. It said a probe into the vessel's violations and the damage it caused to the environment is underway. Britain has stressed the need for dialogue to map out a second nuclear deal with Iran. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has met with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani at the UN General Assembly in New York. Johnson invited Rouhani to London where the pair could discuss things more. He raised concerns about Iran's destabilizing activity in the region. Referring to the attacks on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities, Johnson insisted such activities must stop. He also called for the immediate release of dual UK-Iranian nationals that are currently imprisoned in Iran. Well, France says conditions are now ripe for a meeting between US President Donald Trump and Iran's President Hassan Rouhani. President Emmanuel Macron says it's now up to them to make it happen. Macron says he worked on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly to arrange a face-to-face meeting between Trump and Rouhani. Speaking to reporters in New York, Macron said he will continue efforts to salvage the 2015 Iran nuclear deal.
France is ready to help, and I consider that this discussion must begin between the United States and Iran, and it must be able to involve all the signatories of the JCPOA nuclear accord and the regional powers.
The US has imposed sanctions on 6 Chinese entities for moving oil from Iran. 5 Chinese nationals will also be hit by the sanctions. Speaking in New York, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said new sanctions will intensify pressure on Iran. He said Washington will act against every violation of the sanctions. Pompeo said the United States will disentangle the Revolutionary Guards from the Iranian economy.
The United States will intensify our efforts to educate countries and companies on the risks of doing business with IRGC entities, and we will punish them if they persist in defiance of our warnings.
The UK's Attorney General Geoffrey Cox says the government will not suspend Parliament unlawfully. He was addressing lawmakers and said the government accepts the fact that it has lost the Parliament suspension case in the Supreme Court. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's top legal advisor said the government will comply with the law to stop a no-deal Brexit. The law passed by Parliament compels the Prime Minister to seek a Brexit delay to avoid an exit without a deal.
The government accepts the judgment and accepts that it lost the case. And at all times, the government acted in good faith and in the belief that its approach was both lawful and constitutional. These are complex matters on which senior and distinguished lawyers will disagree. And the Divisional Court, led by the Lord Chief Justice, as well as Lord Doherty in the Outer House of Scotland, agreed with the government's position.
Well, Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn says his priority is legislating to avert a no-deal Brexit. Corbyn says the opposition will then call a vote of no confidence against Prime Minister Boris Johnson to force him to resign. The opposition leader said Johnson should apologise to Queen Elizabeth and to the British people. Corbyn called out the Prime Minister after the Supreme Court ruled the suspension of Parliament unlawful.
I think the government would have had a lot of advice from its own lawyers that to prorogue Parliament for the longest period for 300 years would be questionable, particularly after the Prime Minister had failed to give any undertaking that he would abide by the law Parliament had just passed to prevent us leaving the European Union without any deal.
A phone call transcript shows US President Donald Trump asked his Ukrainian counterpart to probe his political rival Joe Biden. The White House has released details of Trump's phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The controversy has led to an impeachment inquiry against President Trump. Earlier, presidential hopeful Joe Biden admitted that as vice president, he pressured Ukraine into sacking its top prosecutor for investigating his son. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the president violated his oath by asking for Ukraine's help to smear his Democrat rival. Pelosi says President Trump must be held accountable for violating national security and the integrity of US elections. Trump has called the inquiry a Democratic witch hunt against him. In Pakistan, the death toll from yesterday's devastating earthquake in southern Azad, Jammu and Kashmir has risen to 37. The Mirpur Divisional Commissioner Chowdhury Mohammad Tayyab said rescue operations are still underway in the region. Over 500 people were injured after a 5.8 magnitude earthquake shook several parts of the country. The quake was 10 kilometers deep with its epicenter near Mirpur city. Powerful tremors were felt in several parts of Pakistan, including Punjab, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Islamabad. There are reports, however, that the death toll may rise. The United States military says it's killed 11 suspected ISIS militants in an airstrike in southern Libya. The director of U.S. Africa Command, Major General William Gaylor, said it was the Pentagon's second raid this week. In a statement, Gaylor said the airstrike was conducted overnight to destroy ISIS' ability to attack the Libyan people. The attack follows a raid on the 19th of September that the U.S. claimed killed 8 suspected militants. The Pentagon said it will not allow terrorists to exploit fighting between rival Libyan factions. Egypt and Qatar have traded blows over Libya at the United Nations General Assembly, complicating the body's push for peace in North Africa. Qatar backs the UN-backed government, while Egypt supports rival forces commanded by Khalifa Haftar. In his address to the UN, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said there had to be a concerted effort to stop militants from taking over control of Libya. He said the conflict needs to be stopped and support from external forces thwarted. Speaking shortly afterwards, Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani accused Haftar's forces of carrying out war crimes with impunity. He said Haftar is conducting attacks with the support of countries that are undermining the government and UN peace efforts. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world after this short break. Hello, welcome back. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he supports dialogue between Venezuela's government and the opposition to end the political crisis. President Putin made the remarks during a meeting with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in Moscow. Putin says any refusal to hold dialogue is irrational and harmful for Venezuela. Last week, a group of Venezuelan opposition parties agreed to enter a dialogue with Mr. Maduro's government. But larger groups led by opposition leader Juan Guaido rejected the move. 7 people have been killed and 46 others injured by an oil tanker explosion in Mali. The accident happened after the tanker's driver lost control and the vehicle rolled over on a highway in the capital of Bamako. Officials say the tanker was carrying 14,000 litres of fuel at the time. The 46 people injured in the accident are being treated at local hospitals. The Civil Defense Ministry says an inquiry into the crash is underway. In Turkey, 5 people have been injured in a terrorist attack on a bus in southern Adana province. Officials say a roadside bomb exploded next to the bus while it was traveling in Yurigir district near Turkey's Mediterranean coast. The bus was carrying police personnel. Adana's governor says 4 civilians and a policeman were injured in the attack. He says the victims did not sustain serious injuries, but several nearby vehicles and buildings were damaged in the blast. Meanwhile, Turkish security forces have killed 3 terrorists in the southern eastern Sirnak province of the country. Security operations are still underway in the region. Well, yet another Indian Air Force MiG-21 warplane has crashed, underlining its reputation as a flying coffin. The MiG-21 training jet went down near the central Indian city of Gwalior. Both pilots ejected and were uninjured. The MiG-21 Bison is notorious for being accident-prone because of its obsolete technology. India's media has reported 26 MiG-21s have crashed since the last 4 years. Warplanes were inducted into the service in the 1970s, and 170 Indian pilots and 40 civilians have been killed in MiG-21 related accidents. Government data shows the Indian Air Force has lost half of its 872 MiG-21s over the last 40 years. Well, in India, coastal megacities like Mumbai face a catastrophic risk of climate-driven flooding. The shantytown dwellers of its coastal area fear for their homes and their lives. More in this report.
During the monsoon, rainstorms regularly flood the slums of Mumbai, Asia's biggest, leaving hundreds of people vulnerable. For densely populated cities like Mumbai, such disasters are a threat to personal incomes as well as national economies.
If water levels rise, I don't think any part of Mumbai will be safe. Mumbai is an island and there is only one way out, and even tall buildings won't be safe. It's dangerous and worrying for our children's future and leaves every family living here at God's mercy.
Forestry officer D.R. Patel wades through knee-deep water to plant mangroves and trees, the only protection they have at the moment.
If we lose mangroves, there will be major flooding as water ingress will happen as sea level rises and water seeps into the city, causing human casualties and flooding.
Critics say India's largest metropolis is not doing enough to hold back the waves. The Maharashtra Maritime Board says coastal management plans have been initiated in the region but will take time.
We have to go for a stepwise approach, but because our challenges are also multi-faced resources, and with population the demand on the resources is more. So therefore our solutions also have to be, there is always a cost-benefit analysis when you implement a particular solution.
UN studies show sea at Mumbai could rise by 1 meter in the next century because of the global warming. If the prediction comes true, one academic report suggests a quarter of Mumbai could be affected.
A UN panel of scientists has warned the world must drastically slash carbon emissions or watch islands and cities sink under rising seas. The panel also said if current unsustainable patterns continue, marine life could ultimately collapse and the world's rivers could run dry. More in this report.
Days after millions of people held rallies demanding increased action against climate change, a new UN report warns time to save the planet is running out. The new study looks at the impact of rising temperatures on the world's oceans and global permafrost.
We are dealing with two large-scale systems, the cryosphere, the glaciers, the ice sheets, and then the oceans. So we are talking about 70%, 3/4 of the surface of the planet, and these systems are affected by climate change.
The report says carbon emissions, which hit a record high last year, are inflicting a devastating toll on ecosystems around the world. The UN panel of scientists says by the year 2100, sea levels could rise to 10 times their current level.
Last century, we have seen a rise of about 15 centimeters, and the rise in sea level is accelerating. And we must understand that this rise in mean sea level adds to the surges that are coming from the storms, from the increasing intensity of hurricanes and cyclones.
The report warns some island states are likely to become uninhabitable beyond the start of the next century. But it stresses the future of our oceans is still in our hands. It says the worst-case scenarios can still be avoided, but only with immediate cuts to carbon emissions.
Now, French fashion designer Christian Dior went back to nature at the Paris Fashion Week, should I say, with a garden-inspired collection. Climate change at the industry's heels and protests at London's Fashion Week meant Dior showcased fashion quite uniquely in his own way. More in this report.
To honor the environment, designer Maria Grazia Chiori embraced the wild with hemp gardening jackets and a series of diaphanous dresses embroidered with wildflowers. The Italian designer also pushed the couture boundaries by using hemp and raffia in eye-catching, unusual ways.
There is still a huge media echo around a fashion show, and we captured part of this media echo to really say that now everyone is aware that we have to do things.
Chiori says her new collection is not only to keep up with the label's industry image, but also to emphasize the need to take action on climate change.
So these are trees. It's symbolic, but it also goes with part of the recycling of the whole decor. It's time to say when it's over, then what? The years when we just took and threw things away are over.
The 160 trees, which form the centerpiece of the show, will be replanted in the French capital. Started on the 23rd of September, Paris Fashion Week will continue until the 1st of October.
China's President Xi Jinping has formally opened Beijing's new Beijings Airport. The $63 billion showpiece is the world's largest single terminal building. The organization precedes the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Designed by famed Iraqi-born architect Zaha Hadid, the new airport boasts 4 runways and is expected to handle up to 72 million passengers a year by the year 2025. Covering an area equivalent to 98 football fields, the starfish-shaped airport will boost Beijing's infrastructure growth. Well, I'll be back with the news from the world of business and sports after this short break. Hello and welcome back. Now in business news, global stock markets have dipped in response to the launch of an impeachment inquiry against US President Donald Trump. International oil futures are trading 1.5% lower. In Europe, the CAC index in Paris has lost 1.25%. Frankfurt's DAX index has also shed 1%. London's FTSE 100 is 0.75% down. In Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng and the Kospi index in Seoul closed down nearly over 1.5%. The Shanghai Composite also lost 1%. Well, it's 28 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Bye-bye.